Thank you.
Let's see, it has a little, it says recording to the cloud. So thank you for attending today. We suspect that folks who have registered for this, folks who are just registering now, might be having some issues with Ring Central. And so just bear with us. We may have to take a pause here and there, but you know, we do appreciate you being here today. And we're going to start kind of just with a round robin and introduce ourselves, kind of what we do, you know, how we or how long we've been with SGS and our involvement. So I'm going to kick it off to Kyle to start.
Hi, I'm Kyle Bauer. I am a postdoc at UGA, and I was introduced to SGS while earning my master's in gerontology at the Gerontology Institute at Georgia State. From there, I went on to earn a PhD in Human Development and Family Science at UGA, where I continued my affiliation with SGS, and now I serve on the executive board as secretary, and I'm also an active member of the Development Committee, Awards Committee, and Student Committee. And I've been able to grow with SGS, which is really great and part of our presentation today, so I'm honored to be able to serve this organization in various ways.
Great, thank you, Kyle. So I'm Abby Schwartz. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at East Carolina University. I also coordinate our gerontology programs and direct our BSW program. So I moved to Eastern North Carolina in 2015, learned about Southern Gerontological Society along the way, and thought, why am I not involved with this group of like-minded people? And so I think it was 2017, I would have to ask Leanne, but I think I joined and attended my first conference in 2016, 2017, and saw that there were opportunities to get involved, and signed up for the development committee that then led to the committee of presenters you see here today, the subcommittee. I guess we're technically called the survey subcommittee. And then I also work on the Code of Ethics subcommittee as well. So it's really been a fun and interesting experience to be a part of this group. Graham is not with us yet, so we're going to pass over him, but come back when he comes back to us, and we're gonna move along to Karen.
Hello, I'm Karen Appert, and my company is Appert Marketing Group, which may seem like an odd, reason to be on a gerontological presentation, but I'm actually in the process of switching careers from marketing to the aging field, hopefully. I got introduced to SGS around the same time Abby did. 2015, I had decided to pursue a graduate certificate program in gerontology at Appalachian State University, and got introduced to SGS and Leanne, and luckily became involved at that point, was able to do my internship through SGS the summer of 2016. And like Abby said, just got involved, became involved in the development committee, the membership committee, and also I'm a member of the board at this point. And as Kyle mentioned, part of the whole empowerment evaluation principles, I feel like I've been lucky enough to be embraced by this group, and am able to use my marketing background as those skills are needed as well. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about this project and all that was involved in it.
Thank you, Karen. And we've got Leanne.
Yep, hi, I'm in the background here trying to figure out technical issues, but for those of you who have not already met me, I'm Leanne Ferguson, Executive Director of SGS, and thrilled to have been involved in this project in making this all kind of work. Still feeling very frustrated about technological difficulties today, so I'm going to put myself back on mute and try to figure out what's going on, but thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Leanne. So let's get started here. So this is a workshop, so we are going to have some front matter to present to you about building an empowerment evaluation model of program development. But the latter slides are really going to ask and solicit your participation and input, which is just as important as the pieces that we present to you. So just a quick overview of what we're going to accomplish. So we will provide you with some background in the project timeline and story. I know some of you who are present are familiar with this project timeline and story as well. And then of course, give you some background on what we mean and what empowerment evaluation is. Fortunately, Kyle is kind of our resident expert in that, so she's going to give you a great explanation. Then we'll explain how our survey is such a great case study to examine empowerment evaluation in, as well as the translational process model that we developed and implemented. Also, what our outcomes are, but then how you can apply empowerment evaluation and what we've learned from this process, whether it be to your organization, a group that you work with, however it might be applicable to you. And that is going to be part of the discussion process. So framed within the context of an empowerment evaluation model, which again, you're going to hear more about soon, we are going to demonstrate to you in this workshop how SGS has identified relevant and research and service priorities, taken what we found and actually used it and put it into action, and then made that an integrated part of our continuous organizational learning and development. So our project timeline and story. So some of this might seem familiar to you. You may remember having gotten the survey, but in 2017 and through 2018, we did develop a survey that was focused on research priorities as well as service priorities. That was disseminated society-wide to members who were current members, former members, individuals that had engaged with SGS and maybe at one point in time or another. And that data was collected and analyzed as well. That led to the development of a full report and executive summaries for both the research and service components in 2019. That information was also, of course, shared with the SGS board and presented at our conference in 2019. And at that 2019 conference, where we first presented some of our key findings, is when we first met Kyle. And so Kyle approached us and said, hey, she didn't say this exactly, but she said, hey, I have a fresh perspective. Have you thought about this? And that has since led to additional outcomes that you'll hear about, including really this workshop, as well as a manuscript that was recently accepted to the Journal of Applied Gerontology. And they, Karen and Kyle and Graham will get more into detail about that. So now I'm going to mute myself and I will let Kyle take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Abby. So as a conceptual framework, empowerment evaluation addresses the gap between intention and attainment in evaluation research. Fetterman and Wandersman developed this approach to evaluation, focusing on self-determination and improvement with an emphasis on including all stakeholders. Additionally, empowerment evaluation builds on the translational focus of linking research, practice, and education that has been an underlying theme of the SGS mission since its beginning, a mission to provide the bridge between research and practice, translating and applying knowledge in the field of aging. A strength of empowerment evaluation is that it embraces and values the perspectives and representation of all all constituents, including minority stakeholders. Next slide, Abby, please. Thank you. So now I will begin to explain how empowerment evaluation and the mission of SGS complement each other and how both informed our development of the translational model we will present in subsequent slides. The principles of empowerment evaluation accurately reflect the underlying philosophy and culture of SGS. Within this framework, SGS stakeholders have the opportunity to incorporate organizational learning experiences into program development and implementation to create optimal outcomes. For instance, as SGS approached its 40th anniversary, SGS leadership pursued the creation of a dynamic regional gerontological agenda to help guide its future. And in that process, core SGS principles were revisited, namely research, service and practice, and policies specifically related to aging in the South. This inspired SGS leadership to explore ideas for increasing the organization's impact in the region. And with support from the Development Committee, a subcommittee was formed to survey stakeholders and help guide the future of the society. Now, the overarching goal of this research and service priorities survey was to identify important issues faced by older adults in the South that warranted research as a prelude to refining priorities that would become part of the organization's regional gerontological agenda. And during this process of developing and implementing the survey, principles of empowerment evaluation were realized. So that brings us to our next slide for the translational process model. This model depicts how findings from the research and service priorities survey informed outputs that support SGS's mission. And the model expresses continuous process of empowerment, resourcefulness, and collaboration as they became apparent in specific initiatives, which we have labeled outputs in the model. Translational initiatives are broadly understood to be the process of converting research and service insights into practice with the intent of improving outcomes. And again, the SGS mission lends itself organically to this translational approach by accelerating the process of getting information from the hands of researchers to the hands of practitioners for practical application. And next, I will walk you through each component of the model. So we'll begin with the SGS Development Committee initiative. As I previously stated, the process began with the formation of the survey subcommittee, lots of S's, which formed out of the Development Committee. And consistent with the empowerment evaluation framework, each subcommittee member was encouraged to apply their skills, expertise, and perspectives in creating and implementing the survey, as well as engage in the analysis, interpretation, and the distribution of findings. The survey was designed to accommodate the domains agreed upon by the Development Committee. So the survey subcommittee and the Development Committee worked together to identify these 4 domains that you see on your screen. And a similar iterative process was used to develop the service priorities you also see. And then with those designated, their survey was then disseminated to current and prior SGS members. So very quickly, this is a breakdown of the domains agreed upon by the development and the survey subcommittee. From here, specific questions were created to address each of these research domains. And again, similar process occurred to flesh out the specifics of the service priorities with specific questions relating to those. And those were listed on the previous slide. And next, so the results were then compiled by the subcommittee into 2 reports. In each report, the subcommittee proposed a set of recommendations empirically based on the findings. Prior to public distribution of the reports, the subcommittee formally requested approval from the executive board and integrated feedback into the final reports, which are now publicly available on the SGS website. And then next is a brief summary of these are the research findings. So this table summarizes the top 10 results, the top 10 topics resulting from the survey. Notably, the 4 research domains appeared in the top 5 topics deemed important by our membership. While this is interesting to see that all 4 predetermined domains resonated with SGS stakeholders, it is also important that we have not lost sight of the lower 5. As I briefly noted before, empowerment evaluation embraces and values the perspectives and representation of all constituents, including minority stakeholders. However, it's not always feasible to include input from every person during the evaluation process, and prioritizing continuous learning creates opportunity for those who are not initially represented to offer essential feedback during subsequent assessments within our ongoing dynamic process. And here is a summary of the service priority results, which also have influenced how SGS interacts with stakeholders and other affiliates. In the coming slides, we will provide more detail with specific examples of outputs we identified from this project. And if you're interested in reading more about the survey process and the results, at the bottom of your screen is a link to both reports. And as Abby mentioned earlier, we also have a publication in press, and once that is publicly available, we can share that DOI so you can access it. And so the last phase of this translational model was identifying the outputs, which we describe as activities, events, and actions that have brought about SGS's intended changes or results. And next, Karen will describe 3 examples of direct outputs that we identified as resulting from this translational process.
Thanks, Kyle. And thank you, Abby, for going to the next slide. This slide gives the 6 outputs that you saw at the bottom of the translational process model. We're just going to cover in detail 3 of those. The first one, which is the 2020 SGS annual conference domains, the 2 new SGS committees that were created, and the development of SGS webinars. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you, it's got a lot of information. It shows how the survey domains, the recommendations from the the research priorities report and the conference tracks all aligned. So in the recommendations that our group supplied to the SGS board, the executive committee and the program committee working on the conference tracks for the 2020 conference realized that some of the survey domains aligned with the theme of the meeting, which was Aging Better Together, Building an Inclusive Aging Community. So they incorporated those survey domains into the specific tracks for the 2020 annual conference. As you all know, unfortunately, we weren't able to do that conference in person. But what we liked about this as a survey group, we were very excited that some of the actual, the information that we received from the respondents and the priorities that they indicated from the survey, actually, this was one of our first exciting moments of, yes, we're onto something, and those results were actually put into action. We also are hoping in the future, if we continue this type of alignment with the conference and other initiatives, to be able to measure the things such as attendance at the different presentations that aligned with those domains, so that we can actually have some measurements that keep us in line and make sure that we're always watching out for what our stakeholders are telling us are important related to older adults in the South. Next slide, please. So the second output that was a result of the survey results was the development of 2 new SGS committees, the Gerontological Education Committee and the Public Policy and Advocacy Committee. And this came about because the respondents indicated that they would recommend that SGS become more actively involved in public policy and gerontological education. So the development committee actually proposed to the board that these 2 committees be formed, and the membership voted and approved these 2 as standing committees of SGS. As I think Kyle mentioned earlier, this also went along with some of one of the projects that we worked on during this time that was an archive project. When we were looking through the SGS archives, there were in fact these 2 committees previously within SGS. So the Public Policy and Advocacy Committee will work toward policy and advocacy initiatives at the state, regional, and even national level. Our goal with that committee is to have active representation from each of the 14 states in the SGS region and the District of Columbia. And then the Gerontological Education Committee will work to enhance opportunities in the region for gerontology education at all levels, formal and community-based, from grade school through graduate school and beyond. So one of the initiatives that the Gerontological Education Committee planned to take on was the production of SGS webinars, which I'll tell you about in the next slide. So before I go into too much of this detail, I want to back up a little on what happened with the webinar, what happened with the survey results that led us to where we are on this slide with SGS webinars. In the service priorities part of the survey, we asked if respondents were interested in SGS produced webinars. And the majority of people actually indicated that they were not interested for different reasons, but that the ones that were interested, we asked them to provide topics that they were interested in. And the topics, as you can imagine, varied widely. So in the recommendation section of the research priorities, the service priorities part of the reports we did to the board, we actually recommended that SGS, the administration of SGS, which is Leanne mainly, not pursue the actual production of SGS webinars in great detail, in part because it would take too much time and effort, but that if members wanted to do member-driven or member-produced webinars with Leanne's help and the software that we had available, that would be acceptable. So in the fall of 2019, it turned out that 3 member-driven webinars were produced, and actually had greater than anticipated participation. They yielded a financial profit, and they generated new memberships and in fact renewed memberships for some SGS members. So they became almost a promotional vehicle. After that happened, our survey subcommittee actually went back and revised our recommendations to reflect this new information. In addition, the software that we had was updated and allowed for more webinars to be more easily produced. So at the same time, at the time of the 3 fall 2019 webinars, the Gerontological Education Committee hadn't been fully formed. They were working on getting that committee together. Fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic hitting, and our April meeting had to be canceled. So the Gerontological Education Committee jumped in and worked really hard to put together the information on the slide you see here, which are 9 webinars that they branded Webinar Wednesdays. And they did them from June through August, taking presentations that were going to be made at the in-person conference and adapting them to this virtual format. So the nice thing about these webinars and how they relate to empowerment evaluation principles are one of the principles that this is, or that this actually represents, is the inclusion principle, because we were able to include possibly people who would not have been able to make it to the conference, may have had easier access doing it getting this information virtually. And it also has to do with organizational learning, in that our group had to adapt based on the new way of doing conferences and presentations, as we all are very familiar with now. The other thing we as a group like about it is this can also inform some questions on the next survey. As opposed to asking, are you interested in webinars? We know the answer to that now. We can be more specific about what topics people would be interested in learning more about. Next slide, please. So this is just the final slide that shows the full translational process model, and it demonstrates how, after the outputs and everything you've learned from all parts of the process you go through with the projects you're working on, you take the information you learn and you bring it back into a nice feedback loop, back into the next survey design, which will be, the plans are to do that in spring 2021. So all the things we learned on all these projects will inform how we go forward from here. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Graham, who will talk about empowerment evaluation applied to broader contexts.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late in joining everybody. My purpose is to place all of the incredible amount of work that was done by folks on this project in a broader context of the philosophy and the culture of an organization. And in this case, it's SGS, but our belief is that the same kind of principles would apply to others. And I'm just going to summarize 5 overriding components that we feel are kind of the elements philosophically when we try and apply in broader context the ideas that underlie the work that we've been doing for the past few years. And so if we look at this slide here, there are 5 components of this. The first thing that seems to be essential to us, to all of us as we've worked through this, is that we really can't move forward based on anything other than evidence, an evidence-based strategy, which may not be popular in some quarters these days, but basically the essence of what we should be doing in SGS is working on the basis of evidence and research. And I think what you've seen this morning so far is the way in which we went about that process. Now, as we do that, it becomes really important to make sure that everybody is involved and everybody owns this. So the reports that we came out are reports of SGS, and that's everybody in SGS. It's an output, an outcome that's owned by all of us. This is how SGS, as an example organization, moves forward. And I think what we would share with you is the essential fact that community ownership is a part of everything you do in whatever organization you do. If there are people who don't feel that they own what is going on, that they're part of it, then they won't participate, and the organization is weaker because of it. And of course, what follows from that is that there must be a priority in everything you do on inclusion. In this process, through the process, we've involved everybody from graduate and undergraduate students through the communities that we serve outside of SGS, to longtime members, to new members, to people who've held positions in the organizations, to those who are just members and interested parties. And so the essential feature of this is that everyone's included at every stage. Sometimes that means, of course, that you're included where you don't really want to be. But basically, that still gives you the option, if you're included in every part of the process, to become a participant. And of course, as we move forward in this way, the fourth thing that we want to emphasize is that if you're part of an organization, then you have a mutual responsibility as a part of that organization. Don't ask just what the organization does for you. What can you do for the organization? How can you help it move forward? And in that process of assuming mutual responsibility, you strengthen the organization and you strengthen its impact, because it's something that, as I mentioned at the start, we're all involved in this process. Now, this sounds very kind of idealistic, but if you put this in a much larger context, what you come out with is, if you go through this process and if you follow what we've done, we believe that basically you move forward very effectively. But there is always a spanner in the works. There's always something that goes wrong. We couldn't have anticipated COVID, but we're through COVID in terms of this particular project right now. And so the final thing that we want to share with you is the fact that we, in this process, need the capacity to adapt rapidly. And I cannot count the number of times as we've been going through this process that we have changed things and modified things. And even in making this presentation, I don't know how many iterations we've done, but it's a lot in terms of each particular slide. And so the final component of this is the need to adapt rapidly to the changing situation. And I think if this can be applied in other contexts, well, we believe strongly that it can be applied in other contexts of other organizations, particularly small and thriving organizations such as SGS. And with that, I'll conclude my comments.
Thank you, Graham. I do want to give you an opportunity, because you didn't have one earlier. What we did when we first started the meeting was introduced ourselves, and I said to our attendees that once you were able to join in, that you would have that opportunity as well.
Sure. It won't take a second, because we need to get on to discussion and to processing and the other parts of this process moving forward. My name is Graham Rowles. I'm technologically challenged, as is apparent from joining the group later. But basically, I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Kentucky. I've been involved with SGS since, and we tried to figure out, maybe the second year of SGS. So I'm by far the person with the longest history involved in this at this point. But one of the things I wanted to just finish with is to suggest that this organization is something that nurtures people from the very beginning of their involvement in aging issues, right the way through to when they become emeritus and when they retire. And I can say on the part of the older age group that the whole idea of inclusion and participants and being part of the whole process is something that makes me in particular very interested and enthusiastic about being involved with SGS. So that's my background, and that's my involvement with SGS, and I apologize for my late joining the group.
Okay. Thank you so much, Graham. Greatly appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is move on to the participant component of the presentation. There are 3 of you here, which is great, because in one way it's great because you can actually just speak with us. or you can type responses to these questions in the chat. And so first, let's start with the first question. And these are really helping us think about thoughts on the future of SGS and how we can continue to do the work that we've started and presented to you today. Our next survey should be disseminated sometime in the spring of 2021. So this is for a great opportunity for feedback. So in terms of the first question, how should SGS engage members and stakeholders for the next survey plan for spring 2021? And feel free to write in the chat or also just to unmute yourselves and speak up. And I'm going to man the chat.
Abby, I was thinking I'll start if it helps anyone to want to share their thoughts. As somebody who came into the first survey project as a student, again, looking at that question, I would think I might not have seen myself in that. You know, if you said, "Hey, you want to be part of a survey," I wasn't on a track to do research. So for me, it was just something that getting involved in the development committee, it sounded like an interesting project that I might want to learn. It allowed me to help learn more about SGS and the membership. And that's why I got involved. And yet it's been, because of all the different spin-off projects that came from it, it has become so enriching for not only my development in gerontology, but my understanding of SGS as an organization. So I would suggest any members or even non-members that might be interested in being a part of SGS looks at something like this type of project to be able to learn more about the organization and the areas we serve.
Okay. And it seems like you're also mentioning a student component in there as well. And so perhaps engaging students more, as we have seen in some other committees and subcommittees. Okay. I'm just taking some notes. Okay, others?
And I can mirror that. Well, first, if any of our guests have things to say, but I also mirror Karen's sentiments in that fact. I think that's a conversation that we've had as a team many times that our backgrounds and experiences have really shaped this into something that we're proud of and that we want to see continue. And we acknowledge that new perspectives are also needed to keep moving this forward. And so as someone who is, I guess, labeled an emerging scholar, is transitioning from student to professional, in that sense, it's been a very nurturing experience. And I would hope that this in particular could help others feel that. And then also knowing that SGS, that's written into the mission, it's written into the culture here, and being able to represent that through this project, I hope is something that we could also build on in the next iterations.
Great, thank you, Kyle and Karen. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, so Stephen wrote, thank y'all for your excellent work throughout this survey and presentation process. This process will provide significant changes and opportunities for all SGS members and far beyond in our fields of endeavors. Great, thank you for your comment and your claps. We appreciate that as well. Great, so let's, if there aren't other comments from, I see that there are others present. This is a no pressure situation. I just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to be heard. Given the current circumstances, how can SGS continue to build capacity to adapt, considering our uncertain future? And of course, as you know, that we've discussed, you know, we're focused specifically on research priorities and in service priorities.
I'll I'll start the conversation. And again, anyone who wants to jump in, this is, as Abby said, it's very loose and more of a almost
Casual, yeah.
Yeah. Personally, the switch to a lot of virtual presentations, conferences, things like that, as much as I think everybody's getting on Zoom and Ring Central and Google Meetings and overload, it really does open up the opportunity for people to get involved in something that they might not have been able to if you had to travel somewhere to be in person. I see our research priorities potentially changing, not significantly, but in how we tackle those. And also, we're always going to have to consider now the effects of the pandemic and how those impact all those things, that all the topics we had from before. We have to look at them through a COVID lens. But also it may change, our survey was done online, so that was good. We're in line with being able to access information digitally. I think the service priorities might be a little bit tougher because those are, again, typically those are things that we would want to do in person. So that's a challenge, and I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that, on how you tackle service priorities in a virtual world.
I mean, in response to your comment, and I can be quiet as soon as I see somebody else jump in, because I'm more interested in hearing other people, but I think something that I'm curious about is the people that we did not hear from. I would like to hear their input, and I don't think we have quite figured that out yet, but we will as a survey subcommittee, how to reach the individuals that we didn't reach and why didn't we reach them. And in terms of service priorities, there are actually a lot of different kinds, and they vary by discipline widely, but kind of service learning types of opportunities. And I think that we can monopolize on that. Those opportunities are continuing to develop because of our current circumstances with COVID, and that's something as a subcommittee we should really examine further and solicit responses from our members who are diverse in what they do and where they are in terms of what are things that they've been doing to further engage in service.
May I go ahead and do a verbal here?
Please, please.
Please. I drew a circle and I couldn't find it when you were analyzing how you should reframe the logo, and it went something like this. The basis of operation in an academic environment seems to me to be twofold: research and then education.
Mm-hmm.
I completed my cycle or circle, as I am a practitioner out here, with implementation, which means those people who become educated are actually implementing it out in the world and making things happen. They see needs that are not met because of the education and implementation, and therefore enter into advocacy. And that results in partnerships, which enlighten everyone to the need to further research. And that becomes a never-ending cycle. The growth, the generic, not the organic growth that results from this kind of cycle of activity is exactly what your study portrays and asks us to participate in, and asks each of us to participate in and listen to one another. that process, in other words, this process, and I so applaud you for it, is one in which the growth of our organization, the growth of partners as need be, that we can't be the answer to everything, that our partners are also answering things, that making things happen is intentional, and we become capable and supported and supportive to one another, us and our partners and all of those involved in research by this process. So I think that when you ask, where's the service component, it is in all of us. There isn't a one of us that isn't involved separately from being a researcher or an educator or a practitioner who isn't involved in service one way or another. And that is an attendant human function to all of the activities in this cycle. I would go on to say we can guide those the same as we can guide any other implementation service. We can look at service as an area of study, educate people about the most effective service, and help them to implement it. So that, and I see that happening in AARP, for example, or Rotary, where if you're familiar with the text, toxic charity has been done away with, and service projects must be sustainable. This empowerment to everyone in the cycle, including the people that are served, is, I applaud you for it. This is what you're about.
Well, thank you. I think that was very well said, and a nice way of kind of bringing it all together and showing that it is a cyclical process, and also a reminder too that we are engaged in that way, even though if we may not be readily aware of it. And I'm glad that we are recording this so that I can go back and listen to what you said again, so that I can really process what you said, because I think it's extremely valuable.
And I'd like to add too what Steffen said about intentionality, which I think is so important too. In our even more full model in the paper, we frame, and we spoke about it a little bit during this presentation, but we frame the entire model within the context and the mission of SGS, so that the things that we have done and the things that we hope to do are all part of that mission and context, which we believe is part of the culture. So it's not just the fact that we're doing things to do them. It's the fact that these are intentional decisions that we together make. And I think that is really the nice part, and to allow that growth in the future iterations.
Yeah, I mean, what I find most exciting is that we've actually taken what we've learned and applied it. And you can think, and the group has talked about this before, and this is also a result, I think, too, of our size as a society, but oftentimes that information gets lost, or it doesn't get applied, or other things happen, and foci change, whatever. But to actually see this carry through is really exciting, and makes you want to go through the process again, right? I think Graham was going to say something.
I think one of the things that's going to be very important as we try to build forward and try and adapt to the change is to try and become a little visionary and a little looking ahead in terms of what some of the implications of the transition that's occurred because of the pandemic. It has changed the way everything is. I suspect that things will never quite be the same. They were never the same after 9/11. And so I think as we move forward as an organization, as with any organization, what we need to do is to try and identify what are the critical issues that are important in the new world. So grandparents in this current world cannot hug their grandchildren. That's a very minor sounding thing, but it's an absolutely major thing in terms of the quality of older people's lives. Many older people contemplate an increase in travel when they retire, and the evidence shows that they do that. well, suddenly they're thrown a curveball and that everything they planned for and saved for is gone. And they have to think of a new way of doing this. And so as an organization, as SGS, I'm so proud of SGS's ability to adapt. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to do that. In our next survey, for example, in incorporating material and information on how are older adults' lives really going to be different, and what does that mean in terms of the questions that we should be asking. So for example, one of the major changes that's come from some research done in Italy is that part of this process, as a result of SGS, is going to be a re-impetus to the transformation of the way in which we care for older adults. So for example, many older people these days, and in my community in particular, where we had 5 deaths in the nearest nursing facility to me, are becoming increasingly reluctant to think in terms of moving to assisted living or to other operations where they would be involved with lots of other older people who would be potentially making them more vulnerable to COVID or to whatever the next pandemic may be that comes along. Because older people, in many cases, by definition, are the most vulnerable ones. And so one of the ways that SGS should be thinking is, well, how will these kind of changes, older people not traveling so much, changes in the priorities that we have in terms of how older people are living, changes in the way in which older people use the space within their own home, where they spend more time. What does the fact that communication, instead of hugs between grandparents and grandchildren, is a drive-by and a wave to granny? And so I think as an organization, we need to focus, particularly in the next survey we do and in the research, and even in our priorities, on acknowledging how the world is different, okay? And acknowledging and focusing on how is the world different for older adults and for those who care for them. And so a good way is to think about SGS looking at new ways of living in a post-COVID world and seizing on this as an opportunity to try and think ahead of the game.
And that's very nice entree into this slide, where we want to start thinking about those topics. Because we are going to continue this process, but it is couched within the new way of how things are functioning, right? And then even smaller within our region. So in terms of the topics, you heard earlier today how we came about choosing those topics and how they were included in the survey. And certainly we have feedback of additional topics that individuals included that they felt were important in that first survey. But with everything that has transpired, this is going to very likely be apparent in not only the survey that we develop, but the results that we receive. And so because we want to keep this train in motion, so to speak, what are those research and service topics that should be concluded in this spring survey?
Being sort of an outsider to the research and the trends in research and all of the reading, I'm, as a practitioner, down here somewhere in the weeds. So let me just throw out 2 examples and I'll try to be quick. It seems that under the current circumstances, economically speaking, and with COVID and the economics, 2 things I've seen happen with some more frequency. And one is you've got people who have 2 generations. So my daughter moved in with us with her grandchild. I had 9 people in one of my client households living together. So the multiplicity of burdens and knowledge that are necessary by an elder who needs to now start helping that grandchild with at-home learning. There are so many research topics that are could be brought up in having this change in households taking place, both economic questions and knowledge questions, service questions, but particularly support questions. How should governmental and other supports be brought to bear to make that happen? Second example, and I'll be quick as I can, I had to drag my home and community care block grant county department that I am on the board of, kicking and screaming into the zone of consumer-directed services, which I don't know how familiar you are with the old CAP program, but in any case, using public funds to support people utilizing friends and family and neighborhood persons who may not be professionals to do the at-home care. We couldn't find any level 1 and new people to do level 1 services. Our money was going begging, and the people are at home isolated, need the health services, and aren't willing to bring in somebody from outside anyway, wanted to use family and other members. And I had to quickly divert their attention to the capability, particularly under the CARES Act, to utilize some money to develop an emergency services program. What's the study on this? Where's the information on how to develop it, how to use it, getting county departments of DSS to figure it out, and so on.
I like that point, and I was thinking about something earlier when Graham was speaking. I think there's been a lot of great ideas being thrown around, but also the intersectionality. So I think the last survey was a great foundation to identify, 4 distinct domains and research things underneath that. And I think it would be, again, going with the mission and philosophy of SGS as being dynamic, as developing survey questions that can maybe take a look at those points of intersectionality to strengthen the networks that we know exist but need a little bit more help. And again, move the dial one section over and help those, like Stephen was just saying, get that information to the people who need them and identify those common links.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I, this first question, really, these 2 questions were supposed to be the first one about research, the second one about service, but really in the ways that we're talking about it, they're interconnected. So
Yeah.
I actually prefer that, the way that that's come out of the conversation.
Somebody once said that research is the highest form of service. And I think that's a kind of useful term, because I think the separation of the research and the service is a little bit artificial. I've just been looking at the domain 4 that we have, or that we had in the initial survey, and that's on slide 11. And under domain 4, we have a series of what we called at the time current concerns. And if we look at those and we try and think about those current concerns in a current world, a post-COVID world, each of those domains there becomes increasingly important, and we need to focus them even more, make them a new domain even, as we move forward. So I could recall as we were preparing this, and my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but we had domain 1, we had domain 2, we had domain 3, and then we had a whole bunch of other issues that we couldn't quite figure out that were coming into focus, and those became current concerns. And as I look on that, and I think about the way in which our next survey might develop, the topic of caregiving becomes even more important, even though it was important before. Grandparents as caregivers, how are grandparents now who are looking after grandchildren dealing with a completely different world where they are now schooling the grandkids at home in a world where education is totally different than it was when they went to school? Social isolation, we really don't need to say anything more about that as a critical current issue. The one that most interests me, and perhaps because of today's failure to contact you easily enough, was technology and aging. We have to think about how the older age population and caregivers are going to adjust to the use of new technologies. And what will that mean in terms of the level of care and reciprocity? There was a phenomenal study done, I believe it in Australia, that suggested that there was a really big danger in our movement to virtual interactions and technology. Because the whole idea was that by using all these technologies that enable people to remain at home, it gave family members an excuse not to visit. And in fact, COVID is doing the same thing. But I worry that as we become more and more focused on technology, and now we can build homes that allow people to live without any human contact, computer-based home, robotic homes, that we are going to be losing something. And so we have to start thinking about, so what does that mean about in terms of our humanity? And then finally, one of the things that a few people have begun thinking about is, to what extent does the new reality of the COVID and post-COVID world leading to increases in elder abuse and neglect and exploitation, particularly as we have situations where older people are limited to contact with very few people who control them. And so I think moving forward, the way we need to do that is to build on some of these themes that, although they were current concerns when we did the initial survey, have become even more focal to what we're doing.
And I think that that's even more of a reason to focus on, I know I'm harping a little bit, who haven't we heard from, right? And then because this is an electronic survey, what are we going to still miss people? So that's also something that I think needs to be considered in the spring. So yeah, so let me go back to just wanted to pull that up so everybody could see that.
Just to talk briefly to your point, is there any way to enhance your survey beyond electronic to actually follow up on those people who didn't respond?
Yeah, I mean, we can set it so that there would be a way that we would know who didn't respond, but then, you know, there's also the idea if people don't want to respond, we can't make them.
You know, the other thing to think about, I'm sorry, Abby, you can finish. I just have a thought on that. Do you want me to go? Stephen, I don't know if you know, we actually had a pretty big, a larger group than we expected that were non-members of SGS that responded to the survey. And I think Abby mentioned that. I'm intrigued. So we have a group that, you know, you're going to have people who are going to respond and not going to respond, whatever you do, whenever you do a survey. But I was intrigued with the idea that some people who weren't SGS members felt a connection to us in some way, that they felt comfortable giving us their opinions on things. I think we go back. I know we talked about we're going to look at the lists that we sent to, and we're going to review those and merge and purge, which I think we need to, because there were a lot of unopened and non-responses. But I definitely think we don't throw out names and email addresses of people that aren't members. We like to learn from the people who may have something to do with SGS but may not be members at this point, and as a way to engage them back in. I do think that's where some of the initiatives came from people who were actually drawn back into SGS because we were looking for their opinions on very important issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are other ways, you know, you don't have to just do, and this obviously is more work than people may have signed up for, but you don't have to just do a survey, you know. I think you can also implement other methods of collecting data, but I think starting with the survey is probably the best starting point for us. I am actually, I'm also watching our time because I want to be mindful of people's time. And frankly, I don't recall what's on the next slide. So let me just go to that. It's not, oh, it was an emphasizing thing. Okay. Yeah, so other comments, thoughts that people want to share about anything that we've covered, frankly.
Unless somebody else wants to go, I just want to thank everybody in our group. I know we've talked about how amazing this group was, but I can't say enough how much I've enjoyed working with all of you. And the fact that we've worked on now, I guess this is our 4th project together from the survey project, is pretty amazing. We've been working, we've pretty much been in communication every month since we started this, since the survey came out in 2018. And I also want to say again how much I appreciate Kyle coming in after the conference last year, because I think those of us who were on at that point, we had already done the survey, we had some of the results out, we did the conference presentation, and I think we were at a point where we weren't sure exactly next steps other than maybe putting it aside and planning for the next survey. And Kyle, just what she brought to us and the encouragement to put it together in a manuscript and work on it that way, not only helped start another project and a really interesting one, but I think also helped us think differently about
Absolutely.
how we were approaching things, and that made everything better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the main thing that Carl kind of added initially, one of the things, was making us think a little larger and a little more theoretically, because we had the survey, and people do surveys all over the place. And one of the things I was always taught is like a survey is a survey and it's done. And I think what Kyle did in adding this notion of theory to it is to make the survey applicable in a broader context, so that in reality, you know, we could do this and have done this presentation and this work for SGS, and that would have been fine, and it would have been great for within SGS. But by adding the theoretical component and adding Kyle's input, what we're doing has got a larger meaning at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Got a larger meaning in the sense that other groups and other organizations can use the same model. And I think we need to be careful as we move forward not to underestimate the power of that, because I think we're trying to share in this forum, but I think there are other forums for doing that, and the publication is one of them. And one would hope that somebody would read the publication and maybe contact one of the authors to say, well, how did you guys do it in reality, and have specific questions on this. So I just wanted to compliment Kyle on leading us in this new direction. And it's a wonderful example of kind of fresh ideas coming in to stir up something. And so maybe what we need is another Kyle. If you can clone yourself to help us move into another way of developing forward, so that the next survey has another dimension of innovation. You know, I don't know, creating a way of being hands-on from a distance, engaging older adults themselves in the process. How do we do that? I don't know. But I think that the whole idea of being open to doing it is what makes this so great, and what for me has made it so much fun to be involved in this.
And just real quick, I'd like to say, so in spirit of the 40th anniversary, I saw a gem when I attended your presentation, and together we've mined it. So hopefully with that, you know, spirit, we can keep mining more gems and inviting more miners to help us do that. And it goes without saying, thank you very much for your kind words, but it's mutual respect, right? It's mutual responsibility in creating this project. So thank you.
Kyle, we have just got to the first seam. I think we need to go deeper to the next seam for even bigger gems.
If I can add,
I'm over here battling technological issues, but just listening to you all has, well, I mean, it's provided me months, years of intellectual stimulation. And I think when SGS and I started together in my role, one of the things we struggled with was really trying to figure out if we were hitting our targets. And by that, were we listening to our membership? And were we listening to the needs that really did exist? And this process has been so meaningful because it genuinely helps us web together all of our activities. And it provides us such an important guide in terms of how we move forward. Okay, and so now we need to revise the survey, obviously, to talk about what happens with pandemics. I mean, we had to revise the survey essentially because of a natural disaster previously. So like, you know, we've been, I'm sorry if I'm freezing, my internet's terrible, but we've been using the survey to help us create our path forward and to intersect our many committee activities and to really feel like we have a foundation upon which we stand. And that has been, for me, so incredibly helpful. And this empowerment evaluation has taught me so much about how to make sure we're not just spinning our wheels futilely, but we're actually doing something meaningful. So for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
I would like to follow. Leanne took a lot of my words out of my mouth. That's good. I would like to follow up simply with a thank you to Leanne for the support you've given them. And I think the visions that you are processing through and are presenting to the board, the fact that you've taken it further, that you're not leaving it be, that it's not a study on the shelf, that this is really a behavioral training for the group as a whole. And thank you for that. It is the thought leadership we need.
Well, I appreciate that, but I would certainly be remiss to say that this has not been a full, equal partnership between everyone on this subcommittee. And it's been impressive. I mean, there's never been a moment where anybody's voice has wavered if there was a dissenting opinion or a different idea. And it's been really remarkable to watch a team of 5 people essentially just work so beautifully together. And want to work so beautifully together. That's the best part of my job. So but I do thank you for those words. Thank you.
So on that note, because I do always like to, if possible, especially lately, and on a positive note, we are very grateful to those of you that were able to attend today. You might be watching a recording of this because maybe you weren't able to attend, or maybe there was a technological concern or issue. But please know this is our information listed here. You could really reach out to any of us as a starting point if you're interested in becoming a part of the next survey project or other kinds of SGS initiatives, or if you just have questions, or if you have responses to the questions that were posed in the discussion card, and because you weren't here, you couldn't provide your input. Please reach out to any of us. We're all very responsive and really welcome any feedback that people have to provide. So we thank you in advance for that. On that note, I'm thinking this might be a good time to close out the session, and Leanne, I'm guessing, will be able to make it accessible to people who could not attend. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of this group and being here today, and Steffen for providing your feedback as well, as that's always welcome too. So thank you. And I hope each of you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.